And I've written another movie. I'm writing a third movie right now. I'm like, I'm not gonna fall to the sophomore slump. That will not be me, you know?
Well, it sounds like maybe you should talk to your therapist about that as well. Maybe that's something to bring up after the movies.
A little,
Just a little.
the
Uh,
conversation may not have already happened. Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure. So, hey everyone, it's David Stark from Watcher Pass, and I'm talking to Peter Cannon, the writer and director of Exposure, which is coming to digital on July 9th, 2024. I'm going to talk to him right now. And while you're watching, if you can like and subscribe to this channel, that would be fantastic. I'll start a lot. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining me today. I've got Peter Cannon, the writer and director of Exposure, which came to digital on July 9th, 2024. It is a film about one person's trauma and their unconventional way of overcoming it. It has a great cast, some really nice slow burn development, and some twists along the way. I really enjoy it, so I'm very excited to talk to you, and thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me on. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Of course, of course. So, first question, are you in a safe place right now? Have you checked the windows? Have you checked, whatever it is you need to check to make sure that you're okay for this interview?
You know, it's funny. As so, the film's about OCD and the sort of the recovery from OCD, and that's exposure response prevention therapy. And as you can see, sort of how Tanner tackles his list in the film. I've done that personally, under the correct supervision of a therapist, but I have done that. And the reason I feel okay to do this interview is because I've done that that ERP hierarchy, as they call it.
Okay, awesome. Well, that actually leads right into another question because you wrote at first. I'm glad that you did that. I'm glad that you were able to overcome it and that you had the personal exposure to then write this film. Because I was going to say, like, how did you come up with this? This feels like it could be a very personal story. About maybe not this specific instance, but dealing with something similar. So it sounds like you did deal with something similar, and that's kind of how you got the impetus to write this. But where did the kind of like the gem of this story come from? Was it from that exposure? Was it from some other trauma? I don't know how much trauma you've had in your life. To kind of
Sure.
get this story going.
So when it comes to this condition that our protagonist has, so yes, it is trauma. It started from a traumatic incident, but the actual the comorbidity between trauma and what he experiences, obsessive compulsive disorder, is actually very common. A lot of it's rather close to post-traumatic stress disorder, but it's the symptoms show up just a little bit differently. It's treated just a little bit differently, and there are other cases of OCD that we kind of discover throughout the film, and we learn along the way. And this is kind of the genesis of the film: is that OCD, that term, is a large umbrella for a lot of very different obsessions and a lot of very different um, fixations and fears and phobias that all fall under the umbrella of OCD, but people might not know about it. And there is kind of this tightly knit community online, the obsessive compulsive disorder kind of community that have found each other online and be like, okay, we all have these same like out there symptoms that no one else can understand. And thanks to the internet, they can all find each other. And I guess kind of the next step of all this is showing the rest of the world that doesn't deal with this, like, okay, like this can show up in some weird ways, you know? And the more we kind of dismantle stigma, shame, the more we kind of dismantle and work through the weirder parts of this in a more public context, the easier recovery will be for the people in the midst of this disorder, because it's a really isolating disorder. If I didn't say that clearly enough, I've dealt with OCD pretty much my entire adult life, and I wanted to kind of make that bridge.
Yeah, for sure. And I did like that you said, OCD is kind of like there's an entire spectrum of it. Because I think, a lot of people, like I have some OCD about certain things, right? It doesn't debilitate me, but it does lead me to like double check certain things that I'm almost certain that I did, but I want to go back and make sure. Like there's all these levels, and this is a more extreme level. And it sounds like you also had a more extreme level, but I did like how you kind of said it as an entire spectrum. Like there is some OCD that is, not debilitating, and at the other end is what, our protagonist and what you went through in this film.
I think one thing that I should say before I say anything else is that I am not a therapist. I have had this script rigorously checked by therapists before making the film, and then I had the finished film checked again by different therapists. So I think that authenticity was really important to me. I when it comes to kind of showing the spectrum of OCD, it not only levels of intensity, but also the types of obsessions. So there are obsessions in the world. There's the classic contamination obsession that everyone seems to know about, like, oh, if I get germs on my hands, I might get sick and die, and that's my worst case kind of scenario. But there are also other kinds that stem from, like, say, I am worried that I am not the sexual orientation that I think that I am, and that unknown is debilitating. And then on the other end of the spectrum, like, I'm worried that if I get into my car, I might run someone over. So I refuse to drive. It's a lot of very wild, out there types of content, but it all shares the same problem. And that problem for people suffering with OCD is the inability to tolerate the unknown. Yes, there is a non-zero chance that if you get into a car, you will hit somebody. It's not particularly likely, especially if you're paying attention and keep your eyes on the road. But like, the things happen in life, and folks with OCD are very intolerant of that unknown. And part of the treatment of OCD and part of the treatment ladder of exposure response prevention therapy is learning to tolerate the unknown by going right up against those things that make you as anxious as they do, and letting your system kind of realize that's not necessarily going to happen right this instant. Like, there is an important part of not doing the compulsions, like in the contamination obsession type thing, where one character stands in a trash can for 30 seconds, and then she can't use hand sanitizer or wash her hands because that's the compulsion that briefly makes her feel better. She has to allow herself to sit with the unknown that she might get sick and die. And that's exposure response prevention therapy.
Huh, that's awesome. And that was a nice way to like start off in the film too. When you see this thing that seems strange, but when you understand like this is this person's compulsion and they're like facing their fear, then this is like how they start to get over it. So, one thing that you mentioned is like a lot of I guess a lot of people who have OCD have been able to find each other on the internet through I assume Reddit and other places. This film had a like a support group though, like an in-person support group. Was there a version that had I guess Douglas's character going off and finding more things on his own, but the support group kind of fit better with his relationship in the story, or was it always going to be some sort of like in-person experience because maybe that makes for a better movie?
Both actually. So scenes are always better when it's not just one person, because actors live scenes are great when actors live in their scene partner, anyone will tell you that. But additionally, there are with the support group, I was able to address a couple things. The first thing I was able to address is that without proper treatment and proper informed accredited treatment, a lot of things can go wrong. And a big plot point in this film is that this is an unlicensed group. These are just people that found themselves. Nobody had the health insurance, or the OCD specialists are and other mental health specialists are notoriously inaccessible with lots of types of health insurance. So not to make some giant American commentary on that, but they all came together because they have this kind of ragtag primitive form of exposure response prevention therapy that is not supervised and curated in the way it should be. So that's where the kind of the problems arise, So that's one thing I wanted to address. The second thing I wanted to address is the different types of OCD that can show up, which we were able to do through introducing other characters through this support group.
Mhm. Oh, for sure. And I did like seeing other people's various OCDs as well, because it does give you like a broader picture of what people could be going through.
It can latch
Uh,
on to anything. It's
yeah.
and if you go onto the forums online, like it goes down some pretty mind-blowing rabbit holes. You can see some pretty out there obsessions, and you can see some mild ones like intolerance for certain numbers and colors, like things that seem like, okay, that just seems like something that, like, it's very distressing, but it's not shocking to the outside person. And then you'll see some things that are genuinely shocking. And that's why they keep it to themselves, because they feel like they can't tell anybody about it. And that's why this community is so important too. So yeah, no, it's a big umbrella term.
Yeah, for sure. And this was your directorial debut, your feature directorial debut. What were you always set to direct this? Was this always going to be a story that you wrote and directed, or was that just kind of how the film progressed?
This was I love the term directorial debut because before the movie releases, it's oh he's a first time director and I and everyone grumbles at everything you say and everyone's like okay the first time director wants me to do this. And I love my cast and crew to death, but it's just kind of funny where it's like there's a first time director before it's released, and then after it's released, it's his debut. Like he's on the scene. It's the context is totally different.
Well, now
But
you've done it. Now you actually accomplished. Before it's like maybe you will, and now you've
yeah,
actually
yeah,
done it. So
exactly.
yeah.
Let's see if the video file makes it.
Yeah. I've actually
Yeah.
talked to a lot of actors who like they love working for on directors like directorial debut because it's their baby. Like it's the director's baby. They've done everything for it. They want to see it through, and they have a lot more thought put into this movie than maybe some other directors who have done a million pictures. This is just another one in their canon. So
No, that is a thing I think about quite a lot actually, because a lot like artists' first albums too, like they'll have 3, 4, 5 years to work on it, and they'll curate everything, and they'll make it some kind of like they'll pour everything they have to it, and then it releases. Someone shows up, say, "Hey, we want another one. Here's your budget. Have it done in a year." And then they're
yep.
like, and so like I think about that a lot, which is why I've already written and I've written another movie. I'm writing a third movie right now. I'm like, I'm not going to fall to the sophomore slump. That will not be me.
Sounds like maybe you should talk to your therapist about that as well. Maybe that's something to bring up after the movies.
A little.
Just a little.
This
Uh,
conversation may not have already happened. Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure. So, speaking of your cast, I loved the cast. I loved Douglas and Margo in this. Like, how did you find them? Had you worked with them before? I thought Douglas's performance was fantastic. Just like he
I
had
had not
so
met
many
them.
things he had to put into his character.
Oh my goodness. It's especially when a lot of his scenes were by himself, which is we really, really tried to have other folks in the scenes, but a lot of scenes, if it's about mental illness and obsession, undeniably, there are going to be a lot of scenes just by himself. And he carried that beautifully. Because there are so many, without a scene partner, that is such a challenging and big ask. Because, it's, yeah, yeah. So I found Douglas through a casting director. I actually found everybody through an amazing casting director. Her name is Lisa Essery, just an absolutely incredible casting director. And Douglas and Margo didn't know who I was, but they read the script and they believed in it and they took a chance on me, and I'm eternally grateful for that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I especially like Douglas's character is throughout the film, I had mixed reactions to him. Like sometimes I was annoyed with him because he has this compulsion that you can't control, but it's like affecting their lives. But then as the film progressed, you start to like sympathize with him and then like worry about it, and that kind of arc for like you said, like one person in a lot of scenes, it was really tough, and really hats off to him for the performance for kind of letting me feel all of that while he's going through this traumatic experience.
I think one of the things that was the hardest to balance was when he starts getting good at it and starts the character, not to give too many spoilers, but this is kind of in the trailer, but he starts getting a little cocky. And when he gets a little cocky, then the audience is like, "What are you doing? Stop!" I think Douglas played that very well as well. It's also it's when you bring up just kind of like, oh no, he's falling into his ex compulsion again. It was a hard thing in the writing process to make sure that we showed it in a way that we know that this is a repetitive behavior without it feeling narratively repetitive to the
Hmm.
audience.
Yep.
Because the audience is watching a story unfold, and you never want to tell them something that they don't like, that they already know. So that's hard to do when showing a repetitive thing that is corroding his life, and you want to see a character faced with new things all the time and develop left and right. And so that was a big challenge in at least the first act. When the movie kind of gets past the midpoint and makes its kind of switch, and the conflict sort of evolves a little bit, that I found it easier in the writing process. But that first act, to establish what he was going through, that was probably one of the bigger challenges.
Yeah, no, for sure. And definitely, I like that you did mix up some of the things that he had to deal with to, like you said, make it stay interesting. Like he still has the compulsion, but you see it in new scenarios. One thing I was curious, talking about Douglas's development or his Tanner's development in the film, was the ending always the way that it played out, or did you have multiple iterations? Because I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure where it was going to go, as we were getting to the end, and so I was curious, like how other variations of what might have happened.
How are we talking about the entire third act? Or are we talking about the last scene? Like, what do
Uh,
we think?
Mostly the last scene, actually. The last scene was kind of what I was most like thrown off by, but it actually was an interesting kind of reveal.
So, in my mind, the very last scene. Okay, so let me back up a little bit. I'm a very big fan of Craig Mazin and that episode of Script Notes where he talks about how a character starts with something that they like, and this not just Craig Mazin, it's also Joseph Campbell and Save the Cat and all that. But I do love kind of mirroring the idea that they don't need at the end of the movie what they so desperately want at the beginning of the movie. And throughout his we call compulsions because they are little things that you do to make yourself feel better in the meantime. And arguably, Nicole, we're gonna get a little spoilery here, but I'm not gonna try and do too much. Nicole was his ultimate compulsion. He kept
Mhm.
just burying himself in his the reassurances of his wife, and that was to the detriment of their marriage and the detriment of his life. After all these experiences that he went through, we not only get a moment where he feels as though he doesn't need that, we also get a pretty nasty side effect of desperation, of a result
Mhm.
of those behaviors in the first act. And it's kind of a final nail in the coffin of this wasn't healthy. And what is healthy is trusting the all the things that you've learned, tolerating that unknown, and being able to. I'm really trying not to spoil it,
Yeah,
but
no, yeah, no, yeah, I think that that's right.
sort of to tolerate unknowns by yourself without leaning on someone so intensely that some nasty things happen.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a good way to describe it. I do like how you explained that also. So, very last question. I know we're running low on time.
Sure.
What is your biggest fear, if you would like to share?
Fear of, oh God, it changes. I guess ultimately judgment. I guess maybe failure, but maybe also judgment. These are very broad strokes. It gets more specific than that, but I have a hard time because my brain knows that if someone's disapproval isn't going to ruin your life, but it's socialization's a crazy thing, you
Yeah.
know? So
And
yeah, I would say broad strokes probably it used to be failure, but I guess now it's judgment. I don't know, weird.
well, that's because yeah, now you had your debut. Before, when you were the up and coming director, it was probably failure. And now that you've had your debut, it's
Yeah.
judgment.
Yeah,
So,
right. Yeah.
so this is the ultimate exposure therapy right here, releasing a film to the
You have
world to be judged.
no idea how deep what you're saying goes.
So I get that a lot actually. So you can judge the film for yourself now that it's out on digital. The film is Exposure. It came to digital on July 9th, 2024. Like I said, I really liked it. I thought it was a really interesting thriller that dealt with trauma in like an unconventional way to overcome it and kind of confront it. This is the writer and director Peter Cannon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for yours.
That was Peter Cannon, the writer and director of Exposure, which came to digital on July 9th, 2024. It is an indie thriller about one person's trauma and the unconventional way they try to get over it. It has some really great performances, a really nice slow burn, and some twists along the way. If you like this interview, please like and subscribe to this channel. It helps me out a lot. Make sure all my new content goes straight to you. Thank you.